Well, hi everybody. I'm Beatty Fredos, and it is so true. We need love. We need a lot more love and a lot less win-lose and a lot less winners and losers and a lot more having people be willing to have conversations with one another, have real conversations. I think so oftentimes the art of conversing, if we have differences of opinion, it just seems to be something that is disappearing more and more in our day-to-day lives. Well, I am, as you know, I'm a psychotherapist and a sex therapist, and I am the author of the groundbreaking book on relationships, for better, for worse, forever. Discover the Path to Lasting Love. I'm also the advice columnist for Dance Papers in the Hamptons and Palm Beach. And of course, you know, I've been hosting the Ask Beatty show here on the Progressive Radio Network. We are going into the 12th year, and I am an expert guest in national television and radio as well. But I think of all the things that I do, and I love hosting the show. I love being on television. But I think the thing that really trumps all, and I hate to actually use even that expression, is what I do with my patients in my private practice here in New York City and also in East Hampton. I mean, everybody that I see when they call, they are in an enormous amount of pain and distress. I think that nobody's ever called and said to me, you know, Beatty, I'd really like to improve my communication or problem solving skills. There is always a crisis. You know, I've often said to myself, I wish there was a way that I could actually fast forward people's crisis so that people wouldn't wait years and years and years before reaching out and asking for help. And I really hope after all these years, and many of you have been listening to me, right, from the beginning of the show, that there's some little thing that I communicate to you every week that will actually make, even if it's just a small difference in your life. And I also hope that the one big takeaway message is that we don't need to navigate the ups and downs of our lives on our own, and that the very best thing that we can do at times is to really reach out and get some good professional help. You know, I look at all the athletes. I'm a competitive tennis player. I was number 10 in Canada as a junior tennis player. And as I was saying to Ryan, the producer, just before the show started, I'm actually playing the very best tennis in my life, but I wasn't able to do this on my own. Initially, my dad was my coach, and now I have a couple of pros that are really trying to take my game to the next level, so that there are teams. We all require teams, maybe not necessarily like the professional athletes have, to help us in a variety of different ways. And I was watching some tennis matches last night, and there's the trainer, and there's the coach, and there is the sports psychologist. So again, we need to come together and not isolate ourselves. And it does. It takes a village. It takes a team. It takes support. And sometimes it may just be one or two people to help us to be able to navigate life and live our life in ways that are really in our best interest. Well, tomorrow, my friends, is the election, and there has been nonstop talk on radio and television and the print about what is going to be happening. Is there going to be a return of Donald Trump? Or are the American people, this is my political view, of course, have some common sense and elect Kamala Harris? But I was writing an article for my Dance Papers Ask Beatty advice column a couple of days ago that I really wanted to share with you. I went into my office and I was thinking about, you know, the kinds of people that we let into our lives. And if you've heard me talk about this over the years, the thing that I underscore is really how careful we all have to be who we let into our lives personally and professionally, and of course, politically as well. So I'm going to just quote some quotes from the article that I wrote, and this is the dangerous case. And just think about this, and we can discuss, and we can debate, and you can email me with your comments, and we can disagree, because I'm all about having real conversations and in real conversing with one another. We ought to be able to express differences of opinion. We may not agree, but I think it's a really important thing to be able to be open and to be mindful and to be willing to listen to other people's perspectives, even if we disagree. So I'll be very, very curious to hear from you what you think about my perspective about the potential of a Donald Trump presidency. So the dangerous case of having a narcissist in the White House or in your house. Yes, I am qualified to make diagnosis, and yes, I have definitely diagnosed him as a narcissist, and that means somebody that has a narcissistic personality disorder. But here is the piece. So people either love or despise Donald Trump. And my article and my commentary with you right now, it's not aimed at trying to persuade you on how to vote. Of course, tomorrow is voting day, and I know that a lot of people have already voted. His rallies, and if you've watched them, and I've watched them on television, some of them, they become love fests for the audience. Prominent figures in the business, political, and entertainment world have endorsed and campaigned with him, including the world's richest man, if that matters to you, and I think it matters to a lot of people, Elon Musk, media psychologist Dr. Phil, and I have to say I was kind of surprised about that. Kid Rock, Hulk Hogan, Mel Gibson, Kelsey Grammer, and even third-party rival Robert F. Kennedy, who has broken ranks and jumped over to the Trump side. And millions, because you talk about this with people, and I do talk about this with people, although I'm certainly not a Republican. Millions want to be in his presence, and they adore what they feel is his charisma and business successes and acumen. Others, on the other hand, on the other side, cringe at the mention of his name and fear the end of our democracy if he indeed becomes president. And numerous books and movies have been written about his early family life. I was really interested in his early family life, his love-hate relationship with his father. His father was a tough guy. His womanizing and affairs, his wealth, his marriages and legal problems. And we all have to agree that Donald Trump is a very complex figure, a provocative figure, and for many, a dangerous one. And I've been doing a lot of reading, and I have to confess, most of my reading comes from the New York Times, that many former Donald Trump administration officials, including some of his generals, ambassadors, and national security officials who have worked with him for years, have since described him as a narcissistic, petulant child, a liar, and a fascist. This is what they're saying. His lack of basic knowledge of a complex, dangerous world represents a danger to our own democracy. Members of his own cabinet have questioned his loyalty to the country, his dictatorial, authoritarian statements, and his chaotic, volatile behavior. And if we were in a live room right now, I would be so curious to see and to hear what you feel and what you would have to say about what the people who have worked so closely with him over the years are coming out and honestly discussing and talking about in the media. His own press aides have talked about his lack of integrity and his bullying tendency to attack others in brutish, dehumanizing ways. His own vice president, Mike Pence, has accused him of being reckless and putting himself above the Constitution and has refused to endorse him in this election. But no one in America brings out the love him or hate him feelings more strongly than Donald Trump himself. And that seems to be the way he wants it, as it seemingly allows his combative, narcissistic nature to thrive. So here we go, as a practicing psychotherapist, sex therapist with over 35 years of clinical experience, during which I have diagnosed thousands of children and adults with a variety of different types of psychiatric and mental disorders. I just want you to know, okay, I'm not some lay person on the street. Of course, we all have our opinions. I am qualified and have met the professional criteria to offer a psychiatric diagnosis really of anybody. Now, I, of course, have not, been given the opportunity to meet with Donald Trump individually. I think that would be something really, really an interesting thing. And I think that the best psychiatric evaluations, of course, are done if you're sitting in an office, face to face, and you're able to, observe the person's body language. It's an entirely different experience than when you are just talking about somebody, just from looking at clips, in television and in the press. But it sort of is what it is. But I still feel comfortable, very comfortable in saying that in reviewing the DSM-5, which is the American Psychiatric Association's diagnostic criteria manual, that's the DSM-5, that Donald Trump meets all the 9 criteria of someone with a true narcissistic personality disorder. And I know that we throw around the word narcissism a lot, but here are the real criteria that define someone that has a true narcissistic personality disorder. And if you look around your own life, this could be interesting and it could be educational for you as well, to see whether there are other people in your family, people who you work with, who also may meet these criteria. So number 1, okay, the person has a grandiose sense of self-importance, exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements. Do you know anybody like that? Number 2 is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, and brilliance. These are fantasies, a preoccupation with these types of fantasies. Number 3, believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high status people or institutions. Number 4, requires excessive admiration. Number 5, has a sense of entitlement, unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment. You're going to be able to listen to all of this again when you go to the Progressive Radio Network archives. Number 6 is interpersonally exploitative, takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own goals, and ends. Number 7, and this is something so important. I mean, these things are all important, but lacks empathy, is unwilling or unable to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Number 8, is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of him. And number 9, shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. So I feel that this diagnosis is particularly, and I would wonder that, what you would think about this too, is particularly problematic for someone seeking the highest office in the country. Now, just think about this, and maybe you know people like this in your own personal life as well. A person who is arrogant, haughty, lacks empathy, has a sense of entitlement, requires excessive admiration, and who is preoccupied with grandiosity, can only look at issues in terms of how it will affect him or her, how it will make him feel, and how it will make him look. It becomes always, always about the other person, not about you, not about the country, not about others, but always about that person. In our countries, we have many social issues and concerns, such as rising poverty rates, skyrocketing housing and food costs, the mental and physical health of all Americans, the environmental catastrophe looming, our involvement in endless wars, our need for a true security rooted in peace and justice in a dangerized, polarized world. I mean, that is the reality. But with someone who is a true narcissist and is someone who has a narcissistic personality disorder, okay, it will always, these issues, these concerns, these crises will always be secondary. They will always be secondary when you have a true narcissist at the helm. Win-win deals are not the goal. They are not the goal of this kind of a person. A true narcissist, like Trump, is only interested in winning, and that fundamentally means him winning above all else. He tells us this all the time. We need to listen. We need to listen to him and believe what he says. So here's the thing. If having a president who exhibits these kinds of characteristics is something that doesn't concern you, and it may not concern a lot of people, then you should feel confident, and you can feel confident in your decision to vote for him. And it should also be challenging to you whether or not, and I think it's important that we assess our relationships as we go along, our personal relationships, our business relationships, our friend relationships, our political relationships. And it should also be a challenge, for you and really for all of us to decide whether or not we want to be intimately involved with someone as a friend or a colleague or even a family member who exhibits these kinds of traits. And I want you to know that, in writing the column and in hosting this show, my goal, it is not, although it may seem that way, it's not to dictate to you how you should be living your life or who you should or should not be associated with. I mean, that is not why I do this. But my primary purpose as an educator is actually to educate you about what healthy relationships, both personal and professional and political relationships, actually look like, pointing out the reality and the consequences of our choices. Because the fact is, this is something that, I say every single week here on the Ask Beatty show. The fact is that despite all of the relationship and self-help books and the therapists and the love coaches, statistics tell us that we are continuing to be in a downward cycle precisely because we do not have clarity about the ingredients that must be present if a relationship is to succeed. So what happens is that far too often we continue to make poor assessments and choices, right? And in the final analysis, each of us needs to decide how we want to live our lives. And I say this every single week, is that my hope is that in some small, little, minuscule way, I can help to educate and empower and keep you safe. And when we talk about relationships being in a downward cycle, for years and years, I am citing the same divorce statistics where 48% of first marriages end in divorce, 67% of second marriages end in divorce. And then people will always say to me, well, third marriages, I mean, obviously we're doing better. But the fact is that we're not doing better, because for third marriages, between 71 and 72% of couples who are marrying for the first time, they too end up in a divorce court. So what is it? What is it that we are missing? And when it comes to domestic violence, I mean, we're still looking, and I've been saying this for years and citing this very depressing statistic for years, that 3 women are still being killed every single day by their so-called intimate partner. And who would have ever dreamed, if we're looking at teenagers and teenage dating patterns, who would have ever dreamed that between 23 and 25% of teenagers are in dating abusive relationships? And then when I look at what is going on in the universities and colleges around the country, we're looking at close to 25% of college co-eds are also in dating abusive relationships of various different kinds. So we're missing the boat. And I think that we have to stop fooling ourselves and thinking that we're doing well, that we're making good assessments and choices, that we're really on a good path when it comes to our abilities to choose people personally, professionally, politically, people who are really in our best interest, people who are really going to add something positive and special to our lives, where we're going to be able to feel empowered and where we're going to be able to feel safe. And this is where I think that we do a very, very good job in fooling ourselves. We're lonely, we're needy, we want to fall in love, we want somebody to take care of us. Can you imagine? Donald Trump was talking on television last week about how he wanted to protect women. Well, from everything I know and everything I've read about Donald Trump, he is the last person in the world who I would imagine, and certainly what we've been told about him, is someone who protects women. I mean, that is absolutely not who he is. That may be his fantasy of who he is. But in reality, as you know, he was found guilty of sexual assault. But we don't need to go into all of that. I think what's important is that we are being honest with ourselves about who we let into our lives. And, I have mentioned over and over again, in order to be able to make sure that we are choosing healthy, functional relationships, that there are three things, just three things, but three things that we need to do. And the first thing, of course, we need to be in a good place. We need to have clarity about who we are, what we want, what we don't want, what works, what doesn't work. We need to be willing to deal with our own issues so that our skeletons in the closet and our unfinished business, that those things are not taking over our life and are causing us to not be able to see the reality of what is going on right in front of us. And as I used to say to my daughter all the time, the relationships, all of our relationships, they need to be the icing on the cake, and we need to be the cake. And number two, more and more, I think that it is really surprising, although I oftentimes say that nothing ever really surprises me, that we're still not clear about the ingredients that actually need to be present if a relationship is going to be healthy and if a relationship is going to succeed. And, in just going over some of the criteria of a narcissistic personality disorder, I mean, do you really think about it in your own personal life? Do you want to be with somebody who has this huge, huge, huge ego, who exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized, is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success and power and brilliance, somebody who requires admiration? I think I oftentimes wonder how Melania Trump manages, although she has clearly distanced herself from her husband over the last few years. And I've been noticing more and more too that his daughter Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner and their children, they too, they made a statement that they wanted to spend much more time focusing on family life and, of course, their own business life, and have basically been absent in their father and father-in-law's political pursuit in the last couple of years. So again, what I'm trying to convey to you is not to tell you how to live and not to tell you how to vote, but to be able to make sure that the choices that you are making in your life, whether they're personal choices, business choices, financial choices, that they are indeed in your best interest. I have in front of me today's New York Times. And the headline, of course, Wave of Lies from Trump Redefines Boundaries. And I was really curious about some of these numbers. For example, the number of false or misleading statements at a typical rally for Donald Trump, according to an analysis by the New York Times, is 64. So 64 false or misleading statements at a typical rally, as compared to six number of false or misleading statements at a typical rally for Kamala Harris. 33% of registered voters who agree with Mr. Trump's false claims that President Biden did not legitimately win in 2020, and 66% of Mr. Trump's supporters believe this. So where is the disconnect? And I know online there is so much, misinformation. It's really hard to know sometimes, what to believe and who to believe. And here, a final quote. This is from a Bill Adair, who's a Duke University professor and author of Beyond a Big Lie. And this is what he says. He says, no one in American politics has ever lied on this scale. So these quotes, these observations are coming from people who have worked with Donald Trump for many, many, many years. So what does this really have to do with you personally? Of course, it makes a really big difference politically who is going to be in power in terms of all kinds of things, wars and benefits and poverty. and housing. But I think that even more important is that we are honest with ourselves about who we let into our lives. And of course, nobody likes confrontation. It typically makes most of us, including me, anxious and uncomfortable. And as a result, the majority of us, okay, will do almost anything to avoid having the talk with people who have hurt or disrespected or offended us. And one thing that I think a lot of people do is that we rationalize, we make lots and lots of excuses for people's bad behavior. We also, I think, make a lot of excuses for our own bad behavior. And what we try to do is that we try to convince ourselves somehow that the person who has behaved badly, and of course we all have bad days, but if you're seeing consistently somebody is behaving badly, it is much more than just a bad day. That the person was having a bad day or bad days and really didn't mean to hurt our feelings. And that may be true. Perhaps it was a one time or a two-time misstep. On the other hand, on the other hand, we may blame ourselves, and this is where gaslighting really comes in, where somebody blames us and we're not really sure whether we're coming or going, whether or not the person is saying things that are true, and we're really self-doubting ourselves. So we may blame ourselves for being too sensitive, too needy, and maybe even believing that we didn't hear correctly or that we somehow have been overreacting. And this may be true too on a particular occasion. However, I've treated hundreds of women, of course, men over the years too, who were living in abusive and violent situations, who continually made excuses for their partner's abusive behavior. I used to hear this a lot initially when people would start therapy with me. Well, he didn't mean it. He's really stressed at work. He's not feeling well. He just got a diagnosis from his doctor that made him really irritable, or maybe, he had too much to drink tonight. It's what he learned from his family growing up. And the making of excuses, it can go on and on and on, of course, putting people at great risk. And these excuses and rationalizations that we continue to make for people's bad behavior who have injured us emotionally and even physically, it can go on and on for a lifetime. And that's why ultimately each of us needs to decide whether we will continue to engage in destructive and self-destructive and self-sabotaging relationships of any kind. And it's a decision, because I hear all the time, well, he did this and she did this. And, my comment, of course, is, and again, I don't want to sound judgmental and I don't want to sound like I'm blaming anybody, but the question then becomes, what is it about you? What is it about what's going on in your life now, or what you may have learned as a child that somehow makes this destructive, self-destructive dynamic okay? And then more importantly, the question then becomes, what are you going to do about it? And especially if this has been a pattern that you have been engaging in either consciously or unconsciously for many, many years, getting some outside support and help, it can really make all the difference in the world. Because in the final analysis, we are the ones that really have to set the boundaries. We are the ones that have to be willing to step up to the plate and say enough is enough. There was a really, really interesting article in the New York Times. And I touched upon the article a few months ago here on the Ask Beatty show. And the article was about how your most ambivalent relationships, these are the yes, it's good today and it may not be good tomorrow, or it's, the roller coaster ride kinds of relationships are the most toxic. So a man, Dr. Adam Grant, he discusses how the most toxic relationships, and you may be surprised to hear this, that they are not the purely negative ones. They're the ones that are a mix of positive and negative. And think about people in your life, and I've certainly thought about people in my life, where you literally never know from one day to another whether or not you're going to get the carrot or whether or not you're going to get the stick. And for example, the roommate who gets you through a breakup and then starts dating your ex, okay? Or the manager who praises your work and then denies you a promotion. And Dr. Grant calls these relationships frenemies. And I think it's a great word, frenemies, supposed friends who sometimes help you and sometimes hurt you. Now think about this. Are there people like this currently in your life? One thing for sure, these are really crazy making kinds of relationships. Relationships that make you feel that you are on a never ending roller coaster ride. Again, never knowing from one day to the next what you are going to expect. And these relationships, I mean, not only are they emotionally and psychologically crazy making, they are really, really damaging to our health as well. And this was interesting that one study found that adults had higher blood pressure after interacting with people who evoked these kinds of mixed feelings than after similar interactions with those who were mostly negative. So it's good, it's bad. As I say, you never know whether or not you are going to get the carrot or the stick. And another study conducted by psychologists Bert Uchimo and Julianne Holt Lundstad, they found that among older adults, the more ambivalent the relationships they had in their lives, listen to this, the more depressed they felt, the more their heart rates spiked under stress, and more their blood pressure climbed in response to stress over the next 10 months. So remember, I mean, the bottom line is that there are enormous emotional, psychological, and physical consequences that invariably affect us sooner or later when we consciously or unconsciously allow and enable people to cross over a certain line and hurt us. And this is especially true if avoidance and suppression and repression and denial or self-blame is a person's typical reaction and response to toxic people and toxic situations. And, I actually found the original article, and, we often think about relationships on a spectrum, right? From positive to negative. And we gravitate, or hopefully we gravitate toward loving family members, caring classmates, supporting mentors and colleagues. And we do our best to avoid the cruel uncle, the playground bully, and the jerk boss. But here again, and I think it's really worth repeating, that the most toxic relationships are not the purely negative ones. They're not, okay? They're the ones that are a mix of positive and negative. And everyone knows how relationships like these can tie your stomach in knots, right? And again, my question to you, once you have identified that this is a pattern, and I hope it's not a pattern in any of your relationships, but if it is, the question, then becomes, what are you planning to do about this? What are you planning to do? You've now identified, you've now done a really good assessment. You feel that you are continually on a never-ending roller coaster ride. But what are you going to do? And it is so easy to stay in these kinds of relationships because they're not always bad. In fact, they can be really nice at times. And just when you start to settle in and you're starting to feel safe and you're starting to feel comfortable, then you get a kick. Maybe not a physical kick, but a put down, something that emotionally and psychologically starts to tear away at your heart, right? So ambivalence is an invitation for rumination. You start to wonder. We agonize. We agonize about ambiguous comments, not quite sure what to make of them and whether to trust the people who make them. We dwell on our mixed feelings because, we want to feel connected, and yet this person continues to do things to us that makes us wonder whether in fact they really care, even though they say they care, but their behavior indicates something else. And although frenemies, and I do love this word, this is, friend enemies are the people who hurt us the most. This is what Dr. Grant found. This is what other researchers found in looking at these kinds of ambivalent relationships and the impact that they have on us. We are much, and this is so interesting and not surprising, we are much slower to drop them as enemies because we're still waiting for that carrot. And in our lives, we have about as many ambivalent relationships as supportive ones. And we don't seem, this is what research is telling us, we don't seem to be getting better with age and handling them. And of course, I would say, well, why do you want to continue to handle relationships that make you feel so bad, that make you feel crazy making, and where you're continually feeling as if you were on a never-ending crazy making roller coaster ride? So, of course, there is no relationship that is perfect and it's purely positive. But I think that it is really important. And the studies are crystal clear. Nobody's debating any of this, is that the mix of good and bad is simply not healthy. It's not healthy for the person who is up and down and keeping you on the roller coaster ride. And it is certainly not good for you who is remaining on the roller coaster ride. So again, my question, to you is, in listening to some of the things that, I've been saying today, and in listening to the research, think about all the people in your life. And are there some people where you really do need to sit down and have a conversation? And if you're finding it, I'll share something that happened to me a couple of years ago. I doubt whether this woman will be listening to me or will be listening to my show. I met a woman, and I'm Canadian, and I met a Canadian woman, also from Montreal, at my tennis club. And we had a lot in common, our family backgrounds, and of course, having, lived in Montreal, and our love of tennis. And I remember coming home and saying to my husband, Jim, I've met somebody who I think could become a really good friend. And then it began. Then it began where she was critical of my appearance. She was complimentary of my game. Some days she would even, send me a congratulatory type of email saying that she liked my show or she liked my email. But then I would never know when I got together with her whether or not there were going to be all kinds of derogatory, negative, critical kinds of comments, or whether or not we were going to be able to enjoy each other. And it was really an up and down kind of relationship. And I remember after playing tennis with her one day, I was sitting in the car, and this is hard for me to be able to tell you. And I actually started to cry. And I started to cry, I think, because I realized that this was definitely not going to be a friendship that I could continue with. And that she really hurt me. She really hurt my feelings. I mean, she was constantly commenting on what I was wearing. And I started, and I hadn't done this since probably I was a kid. I really started to second guess myself and wonder whether or not maybe she was right, and maybe my skirt was too short, or maybe my top was too low. And I really started to get into this place where it was feeling more and more and more crazy making. And I remember I came home and I told Jim, my husband, about what was going on. And he said to me, and it was so clear. He said, "So what would you tell one of your patients?" And that was easy. It was like, okay, this is not going to go on any longer. And I met her at the tennis courts, and I said to her that I had something that I wanted to talk with her about. And what was so interesting, I think she saw it coming. And I told her I hope I handled this situation pretty nicely. I think in retrospect that I did, that I did not want to continue on with the friendship because the roller coaster ride was simply too crazy making and too painful for me. And I tell you the story. Look, I've been, in this field for such a long time, and I need to really walk the walk. I mean, I am very clear about what's toxic. I'm very clear about what's healthy. And as I have told you for years and years and years, I mean, I really do have a zero toxicity philosophy of life. I have nobody in my life that is toxic. And that doesn't mean that I have people in my life who may disagree with me, who may not support everything that I'm doing. But the poison, I mean, and I, in my latest article, and that I'm actually going to be sending off to my editor at Dan's paper, the headline is "A Little Bit of Poison is Still Poison," and how we can get off the roller coaster ride. Because when you're in relationships where you really never know from one day, from 1 minute to an hour, what your interactions are going to be like, it really takes its toll. I mean, I remember every time I would plan to get together with her, we plan a lunch, or we would plan, normally to go out and play tennis. I had this sort of feeling in my stomach. It was like, what was it going to be like? Was it going to be good? Was it going to be fun? Was it going to be, something where I would come away from feeling really, really badly? And no, no, my friends, we do not want these kinds of relationships in our life, whether we're talking about family or a spouse or a lover or a colleague or friends. And to never really know what to expect, it starts to feel really dangerous. And I think that that's one of the words. I'm not sure that Dr. Grant used the word in his article or in his research, but these roller coaster ride relationships where you literally never know whether you're going to be kicked or whether you're going to be hugged. I mean, not maybe literally. They are really, really dangerous mentally and physically and emotionally and psychologically. And it is impossible, regardless if somebody says, oh, well, you were just overreacting, or oh, well, I just really had a bad day. It's impossible. It's impossible to feel safe or secure under these circumstances. And let us stop making excuses for people's bad behavior, including our own. And when we do so, when we say, well, they didn't mean it, or maybe I did something that prompted the person to react in the way they did, when we do so, and when we continue to make excuses for people's bad behavior, abusive behavior, damaging behavior, hurtful behavior, insensitive behavior, we become active and, yes, willing participants in enabling a dynamic that is never going to be in our best interest. And in a worst case scenario, it can end in real tragedy. So I'm asking you to do a lot of work today. You know, usually when I go through my weekly assessment, I ask you to evaluate your own mental health, your mood, your depression, your anxiety, whether or not there's unfinished business or skeletons in your closet that really do need to be revisited and worked through because they are impacting in a very negative way you're being able to really live happily in the moment. But today's show is really about the importance of our being honest, about the kinds of relationships that we are in, the kinds of relationships that we are willing to engage in, despite the fact that they're either ambivalent or they are abusive, or we walk away, as I did from my former friend, mostly feeling bad and second guessing myself and wondering whether or not she was right in all of her criticisms about me. So this is an exercise. It's an exercise for all of us. And you know, the reality is that we can't change anybody. We can't change anybody's history. We can't change anybody's behavior other than our own. So if you're finding, whether it's in your close, intimate relationships or business relationships, you know, if you're finding that the dysfunction and the unhappiness continues, you know, from one year to another with a variety of different people, and whether or not this is in fact a pattern that you somehow learned consciously or unconsciously, probably, you know, growing up when you were a child, or maybe when you were a child, you grew up with parents where you never knew what to expect from day to day. And that's, you know, some of the questions that I'll oftentimes ask parents: were your parents mostly consistently loving and respectful? Did you grow up feeling emotionally, physically safe? Or on the other hand, okay, was your childhood experience one where you never knew from one day to the next really what to expect? One day you were an amazing child, the next day you were a bad little girl. So if this was the case, never knowing really what to expect, it's highly probable that this roller coaster ride dynamic became the norm for you. It was familiar. It's what you lived with. It is what you knew and experienced. In fact, many of my patients before, undergoing therapy with me, who came from volatile, abusive families, and this is interesting, but not surprising. They felt uncomfortable, not so much in the volatile and abusive situations, but they felt uncomfortable in relationships that were mostly stable. And you might say, well, what is that about? How can you feel uncomfortable in a relationship that's nice and stable and loving? Well, they would describe these relationships as boring because they were unfamiliar. There wasn't, in quotes, the excitement as there was in these volatile roller coaster ride, situations. And, with most of my patients, they'd probably agree that they really needed, some therapy to be able to really figure this out and realize that the continual ups and downs in relationships and ambivalence was certainly not the way to live. It was certainly not in anybody's best interest at all. And what's so interesting is once we're willing to make some necessary changes within ourselves, we are well. We don't know about the other people, but we are well on our way to be able to live a happier and healthier life. And you might wonder why? Because we have clarity. We have clarity, maybe for the first time in our lives, about what's healthy and unhealthy and destructive and self-destructive and self-sabotaging. And the best is that we don't have to second guess. We don't have to wonder whether or not that comment was hurtful or harmful or loving. We have clarity. And it's because we now have learned to be able to see people exactly as they are. And the reality, of course, is that the real ultimate truth, it really does set us free. Well, I can't believe it is 3:58 here in very sunny, lovely New York City. Time has really come and gone very quickly today. I have my two weekly messages that I want to leave you with, which are really very apropos of what I've been talking about today. The first, of course, is to make sure that you are doing everything possible to be living your life in ways that are in your best interest. You need to be good to yourself, and you need to be very, very sure that the people who you will allow into your life will be loving, will be empathic, will be compassionate and supportive in you. Zero toxicity, my friends. Okay, maybe that's a commitment that you can make to yourself today. And of course, secondly, we all do, despite all the ups and downs in life, politically and in every other arena, we all need to do a much, 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 much better job in learning to accept, yes, and even love each other. So have a very, very good rest of the day. I hope this was helpful. I hope that there was some little thing that I said today that will be an important takeaway for you that will make your day and your days happier and healthier. So goodbye, everybody. Talk with you next Monday and every Monday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on the Ask Beatty Show on the Progressive Radio Network. Goodbye, everybody.